welcome to episode 3 of Black Barbies and Books. Today we will be discussing the transcript of Chimamanda Adichie's TED Talk that is titled "The Danger of a Single Story." As usual, we have some questions we're gonna run down and let's just get into it.
I'm Gabby, by the way.
Oh, I'm Anaya.
That was not great. Danielle.
Who swears like that? I said go in the bin.
I wanted to have snacks with me, and I can't, so I'm
like,
chefing it up.
She's protesting, I think. I don't know.
Hey y'all, I'm Jakai.
Her and Gabby.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
We're the Black Barbies.
Our first question is, what is a single story, and what do you believe are the dangers and implications of it?
I mean, to me, a single story, what I took away is just, a stereotype, generalizing a group of people, whether it's an ethnic group, ethnic Blacks, or or just categorizing, just any groups in life, So we all know there's a bunch of single stories about Black people, that we love watermelon and fried chicken, and we can't swim, and a lot of those things. But Jakai hates watermelon.
I hate watermelon too, by the way. No one in this household eats watermelon, so that's a really mean stereotype because I think watermelon is nasty.
Wait, did you guys see that story where the IKEA on Juneteenth, their menu was fried chicken and watermelon?
Fried chicken and watermelon.
There was a video of a girl on TikTok that was an Amazon worker. For Juneteenth, they sent out Juneteenth t-shirts and then had complimentary lunch for Amazon for Juneteenth, which was fried chicken. I said,
and it looked dry.
And then that's the worst part. It's like when they keep posting all this Black food that they're making, none of it looks good. I'm like, if you're gonna at least like appropriate the culture, like at least make the food look good. Like what? Please have a menu that's appealing for all. Like
I'm cracking up, but yeah.
So that's what Juneteenth means to y'all? Fried chicken?
Exactly. Fried chicken, apparently, and watermelon.
Fried chicken and watermelon. And I'm offended because there's a lot of Black people that don't like watermelon.
I'm not one of
fried chicken.
Or fried chicken. There's a lot of vegan
It's
Black
not even
people.
about there being people that don't fall in or out of it, though. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not even about, like, people falling into the stereotype or not. It's like, why is that even a thing? Like,
why? Yeah.
And I think that's probably the point she gets at with this single story is that even if a person does like match a stereotype or doesn't, like they're never the exact same as someone else like in their group. There's plenty of Black people that love fried chicken and watermelon. That don't mean you know their whole life. So
But the reason,
there you go.
The reason I did some research, y'all, the reason they generalize and say we all love watermelon and fried chicken, the watermelon is because freed people, which is what we were called, after slavery was abolished, we use watermelons to celebrate and like enact their freedom. Like that was the fruit that we abundantly like ate and like had during that time. So from then on, they basically just associated watermelon with every Black person ever.
Well, that's beautiful in like a weird way.
Yeah. It was a tradition, not a tradition, but it was like a moment or like a landmark, so to speak.
Why couldn't they use oranges?
But it could be. But I'm saying it could have been any fruit, Danielle. It
that
just
wasn't the
happened
point.
to be watermelon.
Like, why couldn't it have been like avocado?
I don't know much about like farming in the South, but like maybe watermelon just grew better down there. So
Peaches.
And that's the thing with chicken too. Chicken was cheap. It was easy to cook.
That's true.
That was their source of protein and the meat down there. So that's what they used. It was convenient. It's not like there's history,
It is history. It's a good slice of history.
I want to know about, because this question I think is interesting, about what are the dangers of the single story? Like, what do you think all of like those kinds of stereotypes lead to?
Well, like ironically, we were just joking around, but we were just joking around with watermelon, that like we don't, that's a single story, right? The stereotype that all Black people like watermelon, and we don't all like watermelon. There are like, not that that's a serious stereotype, like you just laughed that one off, but there are like much deeper ones that are like very harmful to our community. And yeah, it's just there are stereotypes that are created, and I want to like name a few, but I'm like thinking off the top of my head.
I know that, but that's what leads to generational racism too.
But it's also like the speaker said in her talk, she said her roommate when she went to college assumed she couldn't speak English because she came from Africa. It's like things like that.
Exactly.
And I noted that's a different single story for ethnic Black people, because there's the story that I'm saying you guys because I'm not one of them, that they're smarter, more educated, more pristine, more polished. But then there's the other story that they're literally just like slaves from the motherland that don't know anything and don't know anything about civilization and stuff like that. There's the complete opposite. Yeah.
Live in huts.
Yeah, like
just like really ridiculous things that aren't, but even like the stereotype that, oh, you know, all Black people get into college because of affirmative action. Like, what?
We should do an episode on that.
I know we talked about this a little bit last time, but like that's like a weird stereotype to me.
And I feel like if you can go even deeper to like one of the main problems happening right now with like racial profiling. I feel like that's a direct effect from, you know, the single story thing. Like all these Black men out here, they're thugs, they're on drugs, they're breaking the law. If you have that single story about Black men, like that's why you see like the profiling and all the, you know, effects of that right now. So it runs really deep.
And that, that's why generational racism works though. And because when you're taught that, you just see a Black person and just group them all together. And so you don't know how to tell them apart because you don't know anything else, because that's what you've been told. So that's what I think that's part of where that stems from.
Yeah. So our next question is, how do we recognize our own biases in order to stop stereotyping?
I have something to say about this.
Oh, I wonder if we're about to think the same thing. You go first.
Go up, sis.
I'm going to speak from my psychology background.
Mm-hmm.
We as a people, our brains, like we're trained to stereotype and categorize because it helps us like handle certain situations. And like when we use like our past experiences or predictions or like groupings about people and like situations, like that's how we're better able to like get through certain situations. Mm-hmm. So for one, I don't think we're ever gonna stop stereotyping like fully, because I think that's just how humans are, and that's part of what I've learned as a psychology major. But in terms of what I especially want to speak on, like ethnic and like racial things, like you have to be very mindful to think outside of that. And like you have to just, that's the thing, I feel like I don't know about stop stereotyping, but the recognition
not her making up words.
the recognition biases and stereotypes, and then like unlearning that, and then just going off what you see in that moment and like the individual situation. That's how we'll like better progress.
I agree with you. I also think that this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but my unpopular opinion is that I think communities of their own, like each individual community, and I won't say like Black people or white people, whatever. I think we could do more as like a people to kind of help break stereotypes and not kind of encourage them on our own. And when I say that, I do think sometimes, and like I said, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I do think that there are some things that we might say, promote, listen to, talk about, do in the company of other people. And they might perceive that stereotype as something that is true based off of a conversation that is uniquely our own, but are perceiving as such because they're looking at it as, oh, like they're agreeing with the stereotype that's already been set. Does that make sense? And I'm like trying to say it in a way that's like,
example.
I have an example. It's a very extreme example.
I don't know.
Black people use the N-word. We all say it here and there, or maybe we don't. I don't know. But, you know, we say it, and then white people think that they have permission to be able to because, like, my Black friend said that. And they
So
think they're
your point
conditioned to
is
think it's
not-
okay because it's been taught that it is, even though it's not. But I do think that's where a responsibility does come from the marginalized group to make sure that it's being known that that stereotype is not necessarily a stereotype, but maybe being reclaimed in a different way. I'm
Yeah.
being like very careful with my words. So I hope that makes
No, I
sense.
know. I think that also just like goes with accountability, because if you are aware of, you know, the history of the word and like why we reclaimed it and the way we use it, and you still consciously use it as a white person or as a person that's not Black, I feel like that's on you. So I agree with you, but I also,
And I agree with that. I agree with that. It is also on them. And that's why I wanted to be very careful with how I said that, because I don't want to make excuses for white people either, because it's never an excuse. It's never okay. I'm saying this to everyone watching at home. White people, you cannot say the N-word. Thank you.
I just feel my whole thing is just like, I hate to be like, oh, because there are like, I definitely see it in like the older generations that are like, don't wear your hair like that, like don't go outside like that, because you don't want to fall into that stereotype of being like that ghetto Black girl and stuff like that. And I hate that, because it's like, who cares if I fall into that stereotype? You know, like people should be respecting you regardless, or like, oh, hijabis are terrorists, Muslims are terrorists. Like, what?
But that
like
just
that.
goes, yeah. For most minorities, and especially for Black people in America, whenever we make a mistake, we have to worry about tarnishing the entire race, the reputation of the entire race.
100%.
It's not just me. It's not just my family, my friends. It's literally, if I do something wrong, Anaya has to be accountable for the entire Black population
just not fair,
in America.
you know?
That's just how it is. So that's another white privilege, is that you don't have to work. Well, I mean, some things they do, I'm like, all white people do that, but like they don't have to worry about, or they don't care because they're not oppressed. They don't have to worry about
representing the entire community.
I totally get what you're saying, Anaya. Like, if you ever watch the news and you see like reports on crime and you see a Black person do something, sometimes I'm just like, of course you're making like Black people look bad when you do stuff like that.
But because we were seen like that, we had a price tag on us, you know. So like when we were enslaved, and that's what it was. It was a Black person's a Black person, and that's it. And that, unfortunately, in our lifetime, I don't think we're ever going to see a different side of that, or the other side of that.
No, and I agree with you. It's also, I've heard that conversation a lot with like tattoos, actually. I don't have any tattoos, but I really feel like I don't know like a lot of people that don't have tattoos at this point, or piercings or whatever. But, you know, it's perceived that tattoos aren't like professional. Mm-hmm. And like, I think Black people get like an extra hard rap on the wrist for that, because then like take a Black man and
he's a gang.
Over with. He's in a gang, or he's doing something wrong, or he's been locked up or something. Like, when it's nothing like that, it's just a tattoo. But, you know, white people can go get a butterfly and it's cute. So there's privileges and stereotypes, like there are.
100%. And she says, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story.
I remember I wrote that down too.
A lot of things are true. A lot of Black people do love watermelon. A lot of Black people do love fried chicken. A lot of Black people can't swim. But do you know why? They can't swim because they're scared to learn how to swim, because they used to throw off of slave ships. And they don't want to learn. Yeah? That's not every single Black person. But that is a story for a lot of people. So people just don't want to dig deep into why the stereotypes are this way and why they're said.
That's 100% facts, Anaya. That's 100% facts.
Share a time when you have worked to engage with all of the stories of a person, and how did that change your interaction with them? So I think this question is really just talking about like everyone has initial judgments when they first meet someone for the first time, but I think getting to know them and having conversations helps you change your views, because no matter what, everyone's gonna have a bias, a stereotype. So I think getting to know and actually talking to people and having conversations will help change interactions in your viewpoints and your biases on people.
I just think it's interesting, like the way it says, like, have you worked to engage with all of the stories? I don't know that I've ever been so mindful, you know what I'm saying? To be like, to throw everything I was thinking out the window and try to hear, you know, from every little perspective. But definitely after reading this, I think I'm going to be a lot more mindful about knowing that one person's and not putting them into a group. I don't know that I've had to work to like think about all these different identities and stereotypes because I was just raised to not even, I know not everyone's raised like that, but me personally, I was never raised like, okay, so white people are like this, Mexican people are like this. Asian, like I literally never had those kinds of things. Like obviously you get them through like media and like small things, but it's like I was just always raised to just like that person is their own person. You don't have to throw them, in with everyone.
What part of this talk in the transcript that we read stuck out to you the most?
The author was talking about representation, like in the book, and representation is like always something that I'm like very passionate about because I just feel like Black people need to be represented in so many more like facets of life so that like young people can see themselves in these powerful positions. And she was saying how like she never saw like versions of herself, hair, skin, whatever, in like I think it was children's books. And just stories. And she didn't really see those representations until she started reading stories like African stories and about like her own stuff. And I don't know, I just think that's encouraging because it kind of brings me back to like what we're doing. And we're kind of like trying to like learn more about ourselves through all different types of authors, but we've been studying like Black authors and we've been reading stories by, Black people. So when you see that kind of stuff, it helps you feel like you can do it too. So I think that's why it stuck out to me.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that, Danielle. And just to add on to that, I feel like when we were kids, mom and dad went out of their way to find us books that kind of represented us. Like, sure, we read Goodnight Moon and like Give a Mouse a Cookie and all that stuff, but we also had, I think read a book called like The Color of Us.
The Color of Us.
Yeah.
Just the Two of Us by Will Smith. We had like a bunch that I remember we read. We had Black dolls. Like my mom went out of her way to make sure that we had dolls that looked like us, that we had movies in the house that reminded us of us. Like my mom was very cognizant of the fact that she wanted us to be aware that this right here is perfectly good and beautiful and deserves to be celebrated. Not just, and don't get me wrong, we had white dolls too, I'm sure, but that this was celebrated because this is what we look like,
She talks about how she was like not authentically African or like not African enough. And I know for me, I've definitely been told like I'm not Black enough, or like I'm a white girl trapped in a Black girl's body, like that.
An Oreo,
and I'm not even
an Oreo.
Oreo when I was younger.
I feel like me and Gabby were called Oreos all of high school, like both of us, and I hate that. And they say that because like I guess the way we talk, right?
The way we speak, because
I speak well. That means that I speak white, and I don't know how the two equate to each other. I just speak well. So another PSA for everyone that says that I'm an Oreo.
And she says at one point, then they started talking about her success. And at one point she was like, I began to think about how I could invent horrible things that my parents had done to me, because there's a single story, like we were talking about before, how Africans live in huts and we don't know how to speak and all these other things. And there was an audition I had. I'm not going to say what it was for because I don't want to put them on blast, but it was for a really popular TV show. And on the application, it literally says, what depressing story has happened to you? Or what is something that changed your life in a negative way? Something along those lines. And basically they want you to give a sob story. And it has nothing to do with ethnicity, but they want you to give a sob story so like that we can feel bad for you. So that's how it related to like my career. And also in audition rooms, like they'll be like, oh, can you say this with more of a Black tone, or can you be more hood? Or if it's for
they've said that to you in auditions?
Not to me, but it happens.
Wow.
And
that's horrible.
Like if it's for a Latin role, they could be like, oh, can this be more spicy? Can you say this with more sass? Or for Black girls, can you say this with more attitude? Or can you say this with more neck? Or it's like that happens on a daily basis in audition rooms. And so it's a battle of trying to escape those stereotypes, but also they're thrown back in your face when they're like, can you be more of something? Can you? And that goes along with a single story that not all Black people are the same. Not all Black people have a hood accent, or like,
because I'm assuming you're insinuating that if people that audition do that, they act more hood, they talk a certain way, they do whatever, they get that role. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because the casting or the creatives, which is like the director, producer, choreographer, whatever, if they have this vision, this single story of what Black people are supposed to be,
Right.
and Black people come in casting and they're talking like a white person. They're like, well, how am I supposed to find a Black person to fit this role if they're not being ghetto and being hood and talking
It's
with
like the
slang?
stereotype is literally thrown right back at you and twisted.
Yeah, so that's what I related to most in this. But I can see that world changing after the past 2 years we've had, because the theater industry has taken a lot of heat for the lack of Black creatives and the lack of Black spaces,
Absolutely.
see spaces in general. So I sense that changing. I hope they do it correctly and get their shit together. But that's definitely an issue because Broadway is very, very white.
One thing that really stuck out to me was the way that she basically like globalized what she was saying. So I think towards the beginning I was kind of thinking of like individual people like feeding into the single stories and the stereotypes. She basically just talks about the fact that you need power, and that is how like these single stories are created. And if you think about that in the scope of say like imperialism, capitalism, racism, like it really makes like something that seems small, like someone just like making a joke, and then you take that to like the more global level. It says it is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. She was talking about an economic and political world, stories are defined by the principle of Nakali, I think it is. So it's just about how who's able to like broadcast these kinds of stereotypes out, and like how that affects like everyone on a global scope as opposed to like individuals just like dealing with one another. So I thought that was interesting. And then she said, power is the ability not to not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of another person. And I feel like that says a lot, especially to me about the United States of America, because there's so many things that like around the world, things about there's places in this planet where Black people don't live, they don't exist. But the US has created the single story about Black people, and then there's literally racist people and like these tiny small like Asian countries against Black people because the US had the power to literally put this story out there and like expand their racism. Like it's literally crazy.
Yes, the part that stuck out to me real quick was she shared a story about when she was a child and she had a family friend that was really poor, and her mom would always like say, oh yes, they're very poor, and her mom would like send food to them and left like old clothes to them. And her mom, she even said when she's like didn't want to finish her dinner, her mom would be like, oh well, your friend's family doesn't have food to just waste like this. And I think that's so important because like in America, how many people say, oh, the starving people in Africa? And I think it's so generalized. And she said she went to visit the family friend one day, and I think one of the siblings made a basket or something, and she like thought like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize there was something other than this one thing my mom kept like pushing on me. So like I think that's just like goes back to the first question, one of the dangers of a single story. And it's just important to like know more and see more than just like this one aspect of someone.
Yeah, that goes with the commercials that show the poverty in Africa,
Mhm.
and that people think that's all that's there.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of sad that like with some groups of people or like stereotypes, it takes like seeing or interacting with them as a real person before you
to believe
like
more.
Go out of the single story. Like it's sad that you had to go see that like they have hobbies, they talk to one another, they're still real people even though they might have a rough living situation. But that's really the case for a lot of people. Like a lot of people don't interact with Black people, so then they meet one, they're like, oh, like what? You know what I'm saying? Before they can realize it's just another person. It's just interesting. And I've seen that even with like houseless people. Like a lot of people, they're like, oh, I got to give this person money on the street, they're so miserable, like they hate their lives, they're in a tent, and like that's all they see of the person. And then they speak to someone, they're like, oh, you're just a regular person who's in a bad situation. Like they have a family, they've had pets, they had past experiences. Like it's horrible that like people have to like do that in order to like realize that.
Well, all right. Thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Black Barbies and Books. As always, follow all of our socials. They will be linked in the description. Make sure you check out episode 2 and 1 where we discovered. Hello? Make sure you check out episodes 1 and 2 and keep up with us on social media. And I can't speak English anymore, so I'm just gonna stop talking.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.